The signal came in on a dead channel. That was the first thing Marin Solis noted in her log. Not the content, not the impossible geometry of the waveform, but the channel. Frequency 0.000 null. A band that didn't exist in any catalog she had ever filed with the Interstellar Monitoring Authority. A band that, according to every instrument she'd spent 11 years calibrating, could not carry a signal, could not carry anything, was, by definition, absence. The face on the screen was a man's. He was young. Mid-30s, she guessed, though the distortion made it hard to say. And he was terrified in the particular way that people are terrified when they have been terrified for a very long time and have learned to carry it quietly. His mouth was moving. The audio was 3 seconds behind the image, and when it arrived it came wrapped in a texture like static snow, like the sound of a fire very far away. She rewound it 4 times before she let herself write down what he was saying. I am here. I do not know where here is. I was in the burn. Please, someone. I am here. Marin set down her stylus and looked out the narrow porthole of the monitoring station at the dark between stars. Then she looked back at the screen. Then she picked the stylus up again. She labeled the file Contact 001 and put it in the restricted partition and went to find Director Hassel. He didn't believe her. That wasn't surprising. Hassel was a methodical man, the kind who trusted instruments more than people, which was usually a reasonable position to take in deep space monitoring work, and which, in this, led him to spend 40 minutes with 2 of his own technicians proving to his own satisfaction that frequency 0.000 null was a null band, that nothing could propagate through it, and that whatever Marin had recorded was an artifact, probably a bleed-through from the colony comms relay on the station's starboard side. Run a diagnostic on your array, he told her. Document the result, file it under anomalies. I've already run 3 diagnostics, she said. The array is clean. Then run a 4th. He handed her back her datapad. Marin, you've been out here for 8 months. The isolation does things. Nobody is immune. She took the datapad. She didn't argue further, because she had learned long ago that arguing with Hassel was like arguing with a wall. The wall didn't change, and you ended up with bruised knuckles. She went back to her station and ran the 4th diagnostic. Clean. At 3:04 ship time, the signal came again. His name was Daisuke. She learned this on the 3rd contact, when the synchronization between image and audio had improved enough that she could ask him questions and receive. 3 minutes later, answers. The lag was the first clue. 3 light minutes, or their functional equivalent in whatever medium was carrying the transmission, which meant he was not in her space at all. Was not in any space she could map. The numbers she ran on the waveform topology came back with results that her instruments flagged as errors, because they described dimensions that did not appear in any physical model she had been trained in. She did not file them under errors. She cross-referenced them against the fringe literature, the papers that serious physicists published in serious journals, and then quietly disowned at conferences. And she found in a 2031 paper by a Caltech team that had subsequently been defunded and dispersed, a partial match. The paper described what happened to matter at the exact center of a cascading fusion event. Not near the center, not adjacent to it, the center. The point where temperature and pressure exceeded the tolerances of space-time itself, where the math broke down, not because the math was wrong, but because the universe at that location was doing something the math had not been designed to describe. The Caltech team had called it a breach point. Daisuke had been at the center of the Kepler station explosion. He had been standing in the reactor room conducting a safety inspection when the containment failed. Every other person in that room had died. Daisuke had gone somewhere else. She explained this to him carefully, over the course of 6 transmissions, and he listened to it all without expression, and then he was quiet for a very long time, and then he said, I thought it was like that. There is a woman here who told me something similar. She says she has been here for 3 years. Marin stopped writing. A woman, she typed back. Her name is Yale. She was on a different ship, a different accident. She is very calm about it. I think she has had to become calm about it. Marin did not sleep that night. She sat at her array and calculated and ran models and calculated again, and by morning she had a working hypothesis that she knew Hassel would not accept and did not care, because the hypothesis was right, and she knew it the way she knew when a measurement was clean. Not faith, not feeling, but a particular quality of certainty that came from looking at all the evidence and finding that it pointed in exactly one direction. The breach point was a threshold. What lay beyond it was not death and not another universe. Or perhaps it was both, the way the underworld in the old myths was both a real geography and a state of being. It was a space that existed inside the topology of their own space-time, folded in, inaccessible, except through the one door that no one survived opening, and people had survived opening it, not many, but some. They were all still there, and they could not get back. Yale Barr had been a xenolinguist. Marin learned this in pieces over many weeks, through a triangulation of transmissions. Daisuke relaying Yael's words, Yael occasionally commandeering the array herself to speak directly, her voice warmer than Daisuke's and more precise. The voice of someone who had spent years finding language for things that did not have language. She spoke 6 Earth languages and 3 alien ones, which was how she had come to be aboard a first contact research vessel in the first place, which was how she had been standing next to a fold drive experiment when it catastrophically inverted, which was how she had ended up wherever she was. She had arrived 3 years before Daisuke. She had been alone for those 3 years. She did not talk about what that had been like except once briefly when Marin asked, "Was it?" And Yale said yes. T and Marin did not ask again. What Yale had done in those 3 years, alone in a space that should not have existed, was learn it. She had learned its physics, which were not so different from standard physics, as Marin had feared, but were organized differently. The way the same 26 letters arranged differently make completely different words. She had learned its geography. It had one, a vast and fog-lit landscape of structures that were not quite buildings and not quite formations, ancient in a way that implied either geological time or something that preceded geological time entirely. She had learned painstakingly and at enormous cost that they were not alone there. The Veth had been in the breach space for longer than human civilization had existed. They were not hostile, Yale said carefully, but hostile was perhaps not the right frame. They were self-contained was the word she had chose. Complete. The breach was theirs. They had built into its topology, had used its strange physics to construct something she could only call a city, though it was a city the way a coral reef was a city, grown rather than made, inhabited by things that did not distinguish between themselves and their environment the way biological organisms did. She had spent 3 years learning to perceive them, and another 4 months learning to communicate with them, and another 2 months learning that they had a position on the question of human beings passing through the breach point. They did not want anyone else to come through. What they had done to enforce this position, Yale said, she had seen. She would not describe it. Then how do we get them out, Marin said aloud, to no one, to her empty monitoring bay at Euro too soon ship time, to the dark between stars outside the porthole. She said it the way you say a question, when you already know. You're the one who's going to have to answer it. Hassel found out about the transmissions 6 weeks in, when the power draw on Marin's array spiked high enough to trigger an automated alert. She had been expecting this. She had prepared a briefing. He sat through it in silence, which was unusual. Hassel usually interrupted. He interrupted with objections, with clarifying questions, with the gentle diplomatic deflections he used, when he wanted to tell someone they were wrong without saying so directly. He sat through her entire 30-minute briefing without interrupting once, and then he was quiet for a long time. And then he said, "How many people are in there?" Marin had prepared for this too. She pulled up the list. It had taken her weeks to compile, cross-referencing accident reports and missing persons files, and the thin thread of data she'd been able to extract from Yael's account of the other inhabitants of the breach space. 31 names: the Kepler station explosion, the Andromache fold drive accident, the Beacon 9 reactor failure. 2 smaller incidents she'd had to dig for, buried in the Interstellar Authority's restricted archives under the category personal loss. Cause undetermined. 31 people who had not died. Who were alive right now, in a space no one knew existed, in a city belonging to entities that did not want them there. Hassel looked at the list for a long time. The Authority needs to know about this, he said. The Authority, Marin said, will classify it and do nothing for 6 years and then commission a study. That may be, Hassel said. That doesn't change what we're required to do. It changes what I'm going to do, Marin said. The silence after that was the kind that fills a room completely. Marin, Hassel said very quietly, what are you planning? She had been planning it for 3 weeks. The math was ugly and the margins were terrifying. And there was one step in the middle that she had not been able to resolve, no matter how many times she approached it from different angles. A step that required information she did not have and could not get without asking someone who was in a position to give it. And that someone was Yael. She was planning to open the breach from this side. The conversation with Yale about the Veth took 11 days. Not because the information was slow in coming. The synchronization had improved dramatically since those first grainy transmissions, and by now the lag was down to 12 seconds each way, a rhythm they had all learned to hold, to breathe inside of. But because the information was precise and dense, and Yael was careful with it in the way that people are careful with things that could kill you if handled wrong. The Veth's position on the breach, she explained, was not ideological, it was structural. The breach point was load-bearing, in a sense. It held a relationship between the two spaces that was delicate in ways that Marin, approaching it from standard physics, had not fully modeled. Every intrusion from the outside exerted a pressure on that relationship. A small intrusion like a signal could be tolerated, a larger one could not. A person, Yale said, was not small. When Daisuke had arrived, the Veth had responded. She described this in short, flat sentences, the way you describe something you have processed but not resolved. They had come from the deeper parts of the city, she said. They had, not surrounded him exactly. They had attended him. For 3 days they had been present in a way that she could only describe as evaluation, as assessment. And she had spent those 3 days talking very carefully and very precisely, and she believed. She was not certain, but she believed that she had convinced them he posed no structural threat, that he was too small, that one more was within tolerances. One more had been within tolerances. She did not know about 31. You could talk to them, T. Marin typed. You've done it before. There was a long pause, longer than the 12-second lag. I could try, T. Yale wrote back. But Marin, I need you to understand something. The Veth don't think about individuals the way we do. When I convinced them that Daisuke was within tolerances, I was arguing about mass and energy and structural load. I was not arguing about a person. I was arguing about a quantity. If you are planning what I think you are planning, you are not proposing to introduce a quantity. You are proposing to open a channel. You are proposing to change the fundamental relationship between the two spaces. Marin read this twice. Then she typed, I know. Another pause. What is your plan for getting people out? Get them to the breach point on your side. I open it from this side at the same moment. And if the Veth object? Marin looked at the dark outside the porthole. She had been looking at it for 8 months, and it had never bothered her before. The scale of it, the indifference of it, the way it held everything. Every star, every station, every small burning human enterprise, without caring. It was just space. It didn't mean anything. She had been thinking lately about the fact that 31 people were alive inside it, who most of the universe had decided were dead. Then I deal with that when I get there. It took 4 months to build the device. Hassel helped. She had not expected this. He had filed the required report with the authority. She had expected that and had planned around it. But he had also, quietly and without discussing it with her, begun redirecting station resources in ways that were technically within his administrative discretion and, practically speaking, amounted to full logistical support for what she was doing. He brought her meals when she forgot to eat. He sat with her during the nights when the math wouldn't resolve and said nothing, which was what she needed. Once, very late, he said, My sister was on the Andromache. Marin looked up from her work. Her name isn't on any public record, he said. She was in the engineering section. She was 26. He paused. I was told she was dead. She might be, Marin said carefully. I don't know everyone who's there. Yael only knows the ones she's encountered. I know, Hassel said. But there's a chance. They looked at each other across the cluttered bay, across 8 months of professional distance and 4 months of something else. And Marin understood then that he had believed her from the beginning, had maybe believed her before she had fully believed herself, and had been protecting her in the only way available to him, which was by filing reports and attending meetings. And being the kind of director who could stand in front of the authority and say, with a straight face, that everything at his station was proceeding within normal parameters. She went back to her work. After a while she said her name was Riza. Is, Hassel said. Is, Marin agreed. The device was not elegant. It was never going to be elegant. You could not make a thing that reached inside the topology of space-time and pulled it gently apart look elegant. It was going to look like what it was, which was an act of controlled violence against geometry, and Marin had long since stopped pretending otherwise. She had explained this to Yale in careful detail over many transmissions, and Yale had relayed the relevant parameters to her contact among the Veth, a single entity she described as having the quality of attention that a mountain has, which Marin found deeply unhelpful but also somehow accurate. And the response had come back in symbols Yale spent 2 weeks translating. The translation, when it arrived, was not a yes and was not a no. It was a set of conditions. The first condition: the opening must be brief. Measured not in seconds but in a unit Yale translated as something close to heartbeats, a duration roughly equivalent to 45 seconds. Though the Veth seemed to experience this as a much longer interval, the way a held note sounds different to the one holding it and the one listening. The second condition: nothing may pass through from the outside. The opening runs one direction only. The people in the breach space may come out. No one from outside may go in. The third condition, which Yale took the longest to translate, and which she prefaced with a note saying she was not entirely confident she had understood it correctly. The one who opens the door may not follow those who walk through it. Maren read the third condition several times. Then she sent back. I understand she did not tell Hassel about the third condition. She told herself this was because she hadn't fully processed the translation yet. She knew it wasn't true. Daisuke had a daughter. She found this out by accident in a transmission that had come in slightly out of sequence. A glitch in the timing array. He was talking to someone else. She could hear it in the register of his voice, not the careful, measured address he used when speaking to her, but something softer, more careful in a different way. And after a moment, she realized he was talking to a recording, talking to it like it was a person. She cut the transmission before she heard more. It wasn't hers to hear. But she thought about it for a long time afterward. Thought about a man standing in a reactor room, doing a safety inspection, doing the entirely ordinary, responsible thing that a person does when they care about their colleagues and their facility and their job. And stepping through an accident into a place where he had been alone for months, before another lost person arrived to keep him company, and talking to a recording of his daughter in the dark. She thought about what that did to a person, what it made a person willing to do and willing to endure and willing to not do and not endure, and how a person calibrated the distance between those things when the only map they had was love. She thought about the Orpheus myth. She had studied it briefly in a comparative religion course she'd taken to fill a humanities credit. And she remembered almost nothing about it except the ending, which everyone knew. The musician who walked into the underworld to bring back his dead wife, who bargained with death itself and won, who lost her again on the way out because he did not believe until he looked back, and by then looking back was the thing that killed her. She had always thought the lesson of that story was about doubt, about how doubt destroys what it touches. She was beginning to think it was about something else, about the person walking behind, about what it meant to trust that the person walking out ahead of you knew what they were doing and would not look back, and what it cost, that trust, and what the story was really mourning. The day she ran the first live test of the device, the signal from the breach dropped to 0. She spent 6 hours assuming she had broken something. She ran checks on the array, on the device interface, on the breach band frequency, on everything she could think of. Nothing was broken. The array was clean. The signal was simply gone. On the 7th hour it came back, and when it did, it was not Daisuke and it was not Yale. It was a woman Maren had never heard from before, speaking quickly and with a careful control that did not quite cover the shaking underneath, and what she said was, the Veth moved. Something changed in the geometry an hour ago, and they all moved toward the breach point at once. Yale is talking to them. I don't know what's happening. Maren identified herself, asked for a name. Riza Hassel. I was on the Andromache engineering crew. I've been here for 4 years. Who are you? Maren closed her eyes for a moment. My name is Maren Solis, she sent. I work with your brother. He's been trying to find you for 4 years. The silence that followed was the length of 2 heartbeats in a changed world. She told Hassel that night. She told him in the same flat, careful way that Yale had told her things. Information carried like something that might spill if you move fast. He sat very still. He was not a man who showed things on his face easily, but she watched something happen in his eyes. A shift, like a door opening quietly in a house that had been dark for a long time. He said, She's all right? She sounds all right, Maren said. She sounds like someone who has been managing alone for a long time. She always was, he said. And then quietly, when 2 weeks, Maren said. Maybe 3. I need to run 2 more calibrations, he nodded. He looked at his hands. After a long time, he said, the third condition, she had told him in the end. She'd told him 2 days after she'd received it, when she'd realized that not telling him was a form of dishonesty she didn't want to be capable of. Yes, she said. There's no way around it. Yael went back to them 3 times. The answer was the same each time. She paused. I think it's structural. I think it's not. I don't think they're being cruel. I think this is just what opening a door from the outside does to the person who opens it. It's like a one-way valve. The energy that opens it doesn't allow for reversal. Hassel was quiet for a long moment. Then, the authority is sending a review team. They'll be here in 6 weeks. I know, Marin said. If I wait, they shut it down, she said. Or they take it over and do it badly. Either way, those 31 people are still there. She stopped. Those people have been there for years, Hassel. Some of them have been there for decades. They have daughters who grew up without them. They have brothers who were told they were dead. I am not waiting 6 weeks. He didn't argue. She had known he wouldn't. The calibration runs went well. She ran them at 0300 and 0400 when the station was as quiet as it ever got, when the interference from the other systems was at its lowest. The device performed within parameters both times. The breach band frequency held steady, which Yael had told her, was the Veth's version of assent. A held note, a sustained stillness, the mountain paying attention. On the last night, she had a long transmission with Yael. Not about the device, not about parameters or timing, or the sequence of steps they'd rehearsed until she could run them in her sleep. Just a conversation. The kind of conversation you have when you realize you don't know how many more you have left. Yael had grown up in Tel Aviv. She had learned to read by reading food labels in 3 languages simultaneously, and deciding that this was probably how most people learned to read, which it was not, but which had given her a facility with language that she traced back to that specific morning at a kitchen table at age 5. She had been engaged once to a man named Pierre, who played piano badly and cooked brilliantly, and she had broken it off because she had understood correctly that she was more in love with the fact of him than with him, and he had deserved better, and she had hoped he'd found it. She had never been afraid of the dark, even as a child. She wasn't sure why she was telling Marin this. She thought it might be relevant. Marin told her about the monitoring station, about the particular quality of silence that 8 months in deep space produced. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence, of things so vast and so old they didn't need to make sound. About the diagnostic she'd run for the 4th time on the morning of the first transmission. Not because she thought it would show anything, but because she'd needed to do something with her hands. About the moment she'd decided this was real. When was that? Yael asked. When I heard his voice in the audio, Tamarin said. Not what he was saying, just the way he was saying it. Nobody invents that kind of fear. No, Yael agreed. They don't. There was a long pause. Not the 12-second lag. Longer. Marin, Yael said. Thank you. Whatever happens tomorrow. Thank you for not deciding we were an anomaly. Marin looked at the dark outside the porthole. Thank you for being there to answer. Tea, she said. The morning of the opening, she ate breakfast. A real one, not the bars she'd been living on for weeks. Hassel had cooked, which she hadn't known he could do, and he served it without comment, and she ate it without comment. And they sat together in the small galley, in the early quiet before the station woke up around them, and neither of them said what this was. She ran her final check at 0730. The device was ready. The array was clean. The breach band signal was steady. The Veth's sustained stillness vibrating in the frequency like a held breath. She put on her comms headset and keyed the channel. Yael, I'm ready. 3-second lag. Then, we're ready. She had asked early on what it looked like from the other side. Yael had described a kind of luminescence. Not light exactly, but an increase in the quality of attention that the space had, as if the breach point were a place that the local physics were watching. She said it was beautiful, if you knew what you were looking at. She said she had spent a long time learning to know what she was looking at. Marin had a monitor showing the breach band signal in real time, and a separate readout from the device itself, and a countdown timer she had set to 45 seconds. The Veth's heartbeat, the one-way door, the duration she had to hold this open before it closed on its own. She had Hassel standing behind her, not touching anything, just present, a human weight in the room. She had 31 names on a list. She activated the device. The breach band frequency spiked and then, not steadied exactly, opened. There was no other word for it. The signal didn't spike and resolve. It expanded, like a pupil in a darkened room, like something adjusting its vision to take in more than it had been able to see before. The timer started. For the first 8 seconds, nothing happened. Then the transmissions came in all at once. A cascade of voices that had been pressed against the far side of the door for years, some of them decades. And Marin did not have time to hear them as individual people. Could not. The device was drawing power at the rate she'd calculated. And the calculations were right, but right did not mean easy. And she was holding this open with everything she had while her instruments told her the topology was working. The topology was working. People were moving through. Yale's voice came in clear at the 20-second mark. They're coming through. He's almost. Marin held it. 25 seconds. The power draw was at 140% of projected. She had built in a 160% buffer. She held it. 30 seconds. Riza is through, Yale said. Her voice was different now. Marin had been listening to it for months, and she knew every register of it. And this was the register she used when she was trying to be precise about something that was also making her feel a great deal. I can see the other side from here. I can actually see it, Marin. There's a star out there. Marin held it. 33 seconds. I'm going to... Don't look back, Marin said. She said it quietly, to no one, to the monitor, to the particular silence of a decision that had already been made. Don't look back, just walk. 38 seconds. The power buffer hit 158%. 40 seconds. Marin, keep walking, she said. You're almost out. Keep. 44 seconds. The signal inverted. She had calculated this too. Had known it would happen at the point of closure. Had built the device to survive it. Had not let herself think too much about what it meant, because thinking about it wouldn't change it. The topology snapped back into itself like a stretched membrane, like a door on a spring, like a road that closes the moment the last person walks off it. The breach band frequency dropped to 0.000 null. Marin sat very still. Behind her, Hassel said softly, "The shuttle bay is reporting." He stopped. She could hear him working to control his voice. 31 people, he said. Marin, 31. She looked at her instruments for a long time. The array was clean. The breach band was silent. The device had powered down correctly, all systems nominal, everything exactly as calculated. She had a monitoring log that showed, in precise numerical detail, the moment the topology had opened, and the moment it had closed, and the 44 seconds in between, during which something that had been broken for decades had been briefly, imperfectly, irreversibly fixed. She had done what she'd meant to do. She thought about Yale's voice at 33 seconds. I can see the other side from here. There's a star out there, not fear in it, not relief even, something quieter. The way a person sounds when they've been in the dark for so long that they've forgotten the quality of light, and then they see it, and they remember. There was an investigation, of course. The authority team arrived 4 days later, 2 days ahead of schedule, which meant someone had flagged the power spike, or someone had been monitoring the monitoring station in a way the monitoring station wasn't aware of, which was exactly the kind of recursive surveillance that Marin had spent 11 years pretending not to think about. She gave her full cooperation. She provided every log, every calibration record, every transmission file going back to contact 001. She answered every question completely and accurately, and without volunteering interpretations. It took 3 weeks. At the end of it, the lead investigator, a woman named Vance who had the look of someone who had been made to revise her understanding of what was possible once before, and was now always slightly lay-braced for it, sat across from Marin in the small conference room and said, "You knew you couldn't come back." "Yes," Marin said. "And you did it anyway." "Yes." Vance looked at her file. "You came back," she said. And there was something in her voice that was not quite accusation and not quite bewilderment, but occupied the space between them. "The third condition," Marin said, "specified that the one who opens the door may not follow those who walk through it, not that the one who opens it is destroyed by it." She paused. Yal and I had a long argument about the translation. She thought it meant one thing. I thought it meant another. It turns out we were both right, in different ways. You gambled on a translation. I gambled on Yale's understanding of the Veth being as precise as every other understanding she'd demonstrated over 4 months of transmission. Marin met her eyes. I wasn't wrong. Vance was quiet for a moment. Outside the small conference room's window, the dark between stars continued to be exactly as vast and indifferent as it had always been. 31 people, Vance said. 31 people, Marin agreed. Vance closed the file. The device, she said, can it be rebuilt? Marin had thought about this. Had been thinking about it since the moment the signal dropped. Had been thinking about the 31 people who were now, presumably, somewhere, in the medical bay being assessed and fed, and probably crying in the ways that people cry when they have been somewhere they cannot describe, and have come back to a world that doesn't know they were gone. Had been thinking about whether the door could be opened again. Whether the Veth would permit it. Whether anyone else was in there. Whether Yale was in there. She had reviewed the transmission logs 17 times. She had heard Yale's voice at the 40-second mark, Marin, and then the signal had inverted, and she didn't know what that meant. She didn't know if Yale had walked through or had turned back. She didn't know if turning back was even possible, structurally, once the sequence had begun. She didn't know if the Veth's conditions had applied to Yale the way they'd applied to Marin, or differently, or not at all. She had 31 pieces of data, and one enormous absence, and she was a scientist. And scientists did not confuse what they wanted with what they knew. The device can be rebuilt, she said. The physics are documented. The Veth's conditions are documented. The topology is. She stopped, started again, with a team, with resources. With a sustained monitoring arrangement rather than a single station. Yes, it can be done again. Vance looked at her for a long moment. I'm going to recommend a full program, she said. Under the authority, properly funded, properly staffed. She paused. I'm going to recommend you lead it. Marin looked at the dark outside the window. There are more people in there, she said. I know, Vance said. That's why I'm recommending it. On the day the program was formally established, Marin received a transmission on the breachband frequency. Not on .0 null, on a frequency adjacent to it, a band that she had not thought to monitor, that she was only covering because the new array was 3 times larger than the old one, and she had set it to catch everything within 20 decimal places of null on both sides. A band that was, by every definition she had, also impossible. But she had stopped trusting her definitions of impossible several months ago. The signal was short. The audio was clear, clearer than anything she'd received in those early static-wrapped weeks. No lag at all. It was Yale's voice. She said, I found another door. I am working on the translation. It may take a while, she said. Tell Daisuke his daughter looks like him, she said. Don't stop. Marin sat in the new monitoring bay, in the new station, with its new arrays and its new team and its new resources. And she listened to the transmission 3 times, and then she labeled it Contact TAC 32 and saved it in the main archive and went back to work. Outside the porthole, the dark between stars held everything in it, vast and old, and she had been revising this slowly over the last several months. Not indifferent after all. Just patient. Just waiting to be asked the right questions by someone stubborn enough to keep asking. She was stubborn enough. She always had been.